Pope Benedict XVI once said, "The world offers you comfort, but you weren't made for comfort. You were made for greatness." Welcome to the Huntley Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Ron Huntley. What if I told you right now, yes, right now, young people are coming back to the Catholic Church in record numbers, and not just for tradition, not just for truth, but for mystery. In this episode, one of the brightest theological minds that I know in Canada helps us understand why. Today, I'm joined by Dr. David Deane. He's a professor at the Atlantic School of Theology, a sought-after voice on national television when it comes to matters of faith and culture, and the dogmatic theologian behind Dogmatic Theology, a video series created with Father James Mallon. And that's where David and I first connected. But more than his credentials, what makes Dr. Deane's voice so vital right now is his uncanny ability to read the cultural moment and respond with clarity and conviction. In this episode, we talk about the significance of the papacy in our time. We explore media bias, AI, Latin Mass tensions, and what it takes to evangelize in an era marked by spiritual confusion and secular fatigue. Dr. Deane paints a compelling vision for Catholic renewal, one rooted in timeless truth, authentic encounter, and holy mystery. It's not just a theory. It's about hope, mission, leadership. If you care about the church, if you're tired of decline and ready for rebirth, if you believe that now is the time to lead well, then listen right to the end, because Dr. David Deane has a prophetic voice for this moment in history. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Huntley Leadership Podcast, helping leaders be a positive catalyst in the people they support, the organizations they serve, and the communities they live. This podcast will make you think, laugh, and grit your teeth with new determination to make your parish or business a place of transformation, passion, and purpose. If you're still breathing, you are powered for impact. Dr. David Deane, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ron. I appreciate it.
I don't know about you, but as we buried Pope Francis and then the conclave started, I was actually in a coaching call when I heard white smoke. I wanted to leave so bad. In fact, the pastor did leave. The other two leadership team members stayed, so I had to stay. But I certainly was distracted. Got off the call, and I got to experience on TV the new Pope. And I was brought to tears when I heard. I just got so emotionally wrapped up in it. And not that I had any horses in the game or was any speculating. It was none of that. It was just a love for the church. And I don't know, how did you experience that? What's your thoughts on it?
Same. I think there's two aspects to it. On the one hand, there's the aspect that we share with the whole world, that this is history. Times 10, that long before there was an America, the Seljuk Empire, the British Empire all rose and fall, and the church has just kept going. And so for 2,000 years, there's been popes. And so when you're watching this, you're watching unparalleled history and significance. Mm-hmm. And so there's that component that gripped the entire world. But then there's something interesting, I think, for us Catholics, that when we're in the sedevacante stage, we get a little uneasy, It was really interesting that it's sort of, all these theories start to abound and various factions emerge and everybody is offering opinions and stuff. And it's quite unsettling. And then all of a sudden you see the white smoke and it's just sheer joy. And then when they come out on the Logia and say, I bring you great joy, and habemus papam, and it's just this release. It's a beautiful thing. We'll all remember where we were, and it's a time that we're all united. There may be times, God forbid, when some of the divisions that we've had far too much of start to, glimmer up again. But right now, everybody seems to be just excited and hope-filled, and it's just a great place to be. But it's just wonderful, and it's beautiful, and it's a reminder that God and the Holy Spirit does not abandon the church. It's great.
It's funny, I didn't feel that way It's a good point when you put it in the perspective of history. I didn't feel that way when Mark Carney was elected, but I wouldn't have felt that way if Pierre Poilievre was elected or the other fellow. It wasn't that level of, it's like, oh, this is what's next. Interesting. But yeah, it's very different when it comes to
Exactly.
the...
For me as an Irish person, there were popes before there was an Ireland. There'll be popes long after there is an Ireland.
Mm,
Like you think of the map of the world and how it's changed and how it's shifted. There was no France, there was no Germany, there was no Italy, there was none of these things. And in 1,000 years' time, there probably won't be those things. The lines will have been redrawn. And
yeah,
yet, in Rome, over the grave of Saint Peter, the first pope, popes will be elected,
yeah,
and that's the tremendous hope. Empires pass, everything fades away, but
yeah.
this thing is eternal, and it's eternal not because of us, because we're pretty poor. It's eternal because God doesn't give up on it, and that's the amazing thing. I was thinking that, like, when I was a kid, I was always a little bit, there's been bad popes, and I think of those Renaissance popes and those medieval popes, and that's really challenging to my faith. Like, how can God allow bad popes? And then more recently, I've been thinking about it. Over 2,000 years, there's only been a handful of bad popes, and
Mm,
even the bad popes, at their very worst, the worst thing you could say is they were only slightly better than the secular leaders of the time.
right.
Like, we think about the bad popes, and they wouldn't come close to what your average good president or good prime minister would do.
Right.
So the hit rate is incredible. Like, so many good saintly figures, every one of them better than the secular leaders of the time.
Mm,
None of them with armies. Well, some of them with little armies, but more recently, none of them with armies or tanks. It shows that a sort of, yes, where the cardinals are human, the cardinals are driven by sin and selfishness and all the things that every human being is,
mm,
but then there's that leaven of the Holy Spirit that helps them get it right far more often than not. And I think they've got it
mm.
right again this time.
Wow. So what do you see in Pope Leo? Again, I haven't done a lot of research yet. I've watched some clips, and it's really, again, it's just the newness is so exciting. I love the church. I love Jesus. I love the mission.
Yeah.
I just, I just so enamored by our faith and so grateful for the gift of faith and the relationship with Christ. Um, and yet there are there are personalities and there are needs in the world and things do evolve. How
Yeah.
would you sum up some of these, um, forces that are on us right now as a human race, as a church, and what's this guy stepping into?
Um, I think that's a really good question. I think he's a key pope because we're entering into a key time. We seem to be moving into an inflection period where many of the stabilities and the securities and the confidences which lasted for decades, if not centuries, seem to be coming to an end. This is not necessarily a bad thing. Many negatives are coming to an end.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, we have, and this is a key element in him choosing the name Pope Leo XIV. And Pope Leo XIII, of course, was the father of the Catholic social teaching
Right.
tradition. And the social teaching was an attempt to respond to the Industrial Revolution, that all of a sudden we've got a whole new set of questions and a whole new set of challenges. And the two main answers to this are a kind of a savage Dickensian capitalism, and on the other hand, a socialism or a communism. And Pope Leo XIII had to try and plot a way offering a Catholic alternative to either of those.
Mm,
So too, we're entering into a new industrial revolution in the sense of AI, which is changing things very, very quickly. And I think
mm,
he aims to be a pope that can respond to that. And I think he might just be the man for the job. You mentioned that you don't know a huge amount about him. In a sense, nobody does. Like,
mm,
I'd safely say that I've read and watched every single thing that's possible that he's ever done. And it only took me a few hours, There isn't a huge amount out there. But what we have is really, really encouraging. It's very, very clear that he has a heart for evangelism, that the new evangelization was what he was about all through the early 2000s. He gave addresses to synods of bishops in 2012 on the new evangelization, and it's in keeping with some of the things that Francis and others were doing at Aparecida at the time, but there's greater depth and clarity,
Really?
and there's also a Pope Benedict style awareness that we're not living in neutral space. So one of the things that he's spoken a lot about is the way that the media, in very subtle ways, they tend to portray Catholics in particular, people of faith more generally, in a negative light, as rigid, judgmental, hostile. And then people who have radical alternative perspectives to Catholicism in a positive light, And he's talking about the way that this shapes people's understanding and shapes children's and young people's perspective, and that we need to be aware of this in order to push back against it, in order to contest it. And he was talking about that in 2012, in a way very similar to people like Bishop Robert Barron, like the awareness of the role of media and culture. And so he has that Pope Benedict sense of a need to push back, a need to, with love and generosity and graciousness. But then he also has that Francis element of, a desire for dialogue, a desire for, to be a bridge builder, to bring people in. He has just that tremendous compassion, particularly for the poor. And, so we have, Cardinal Dolan before the conclave, he gave an interview where he said, people said, what are you looking for? And he's saying, well, Pope John Paul II did these things, and Pope Benedict did these things, and Pope Francis did these things, and it'd be great if we got someone who had a combination of all three. And, he laughed because it's like looking for a unicorn, but it's early days, but there's a sense that we have some of those gifts, here, that he has so many of those Francis elements. He's so personable, and at the same time, he's attentive and attuned to liturgy in ways that Benedict was. He has a heart for evangelization and mission in the way that John Paul II had. Like, again, this is the honeymoon period where we're all like, I'm like a teenager with like posters on the wall, like a sort of, and so, and who knows, but it's really exciting,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm dying to ask which posters you had on your wall, but
no pop stars, just sports figures. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was coaching the other day, and one of the pastors that I've coached said something interesting in terms of a conversation that Pope Leo XIV had with the Orthodox community, just thanking them for their for how they've upheld liturgy and great liturgy and sacred music and things like that, and that was a real consolation to him, because he has these that's really important to him, in terms of liturgy.
Yep.
And I know in the work that I do in different dioceses, there can be a dichotomy. There can be this kind of these camps, liturgical camps, as it relates to, different ways of celebrating the Mass. During Pope Francis's time as Pope, when he made that declaration that please don't do, and you please correct me because I'm not going to get this right. Basically, I'm going to paraphrase this. Please quit with all the Latin masses. Yes, it's okay to have them once in a while, but please let's not turn the church into. But that was it. Almost seemed like people rebelled against that and got really upset about that. And so, I don't know. What's your thoughts on if I don't know if that's fair to even ask you that, but
no, it's a great and really important question. I think that that So let me tell you a sort of a a story which probably might echo with some of Pope Francis's reasons for doing what he did.
Thank you.
I am an admirer. I think I may have been to one Latin Mass in my life, right? But
Okay.
I'm an admirer of it. I
Sure. Yeah.
like the theology of it. You know,
Mm.
I'm down with it. And people also knew when I came here first that I was into Saint Augustine and the Church Fathers and so on and so
Mm.
forth. And so this guy, an aging former prof, reached out to me and said, you know, would you be interested in, in coming along to some of our, like Latin masses? And I said, yeah, that'd be fantastic. And he said, great. I'll come over to the house and we'll talk about it and talk about how you can get involved. And it was fantastic. And then all of a sudden, he started talking about some of the horrific things at the Second Vatican Council, and he started talking about the fact that the Jewish people need to be converted, and I'm going, whoa, easy, tiger, and
Yeah.
and that was a thing that is sort of Latin Mass, great, but then all this baggage seemed to come along with it,
Mm.
and I think that that's where Pope Francis was coming from, that he felt that many of the communities that were growing up around the Latin Mass were communities which fostered or at least tolerated opposition to the Second Vatican Council,
Mm.
and were themselves the seeds of division within the church. There can be no going back or reneging of the Second Vatican Council. It's an
Mm.
ecumenical council. It is what it is, and therefore he felt that we need to all get on board. We can't have, for him, these diverse theological cultures within the church, or opposed
Mm.
theological cultures. And so it wasn't necessarily, and this is just my take, that he had
Please. Yeah.
significant problems with the liturgy, with the old liturgy. He had problems with the kind of cultures and rejection of the Second Vatican Council that seemed to be fostered by or tolerated by these communities.
Gotcha.
I would say that that was received very badly for a number of reasons. One, young people are tremendously enamored with mystery, and young people
Mm.
seem to be those who are representing those communities. And while
Yes.
there are guys like that guy who came around to my house who are exactly the kind of problem that Pope Francis was flagging, there's lots of young people going, I love the Second Vatican Council. I just like this. And so I think that what we'll see with, I don't think that Pope Leo will, turn back things that Pope Francis did.
Sure.
Um, but I, but I do think that he has a different. He is capable of affirming the Second Vatican Council, affirming the fact that we must be unified, affirming the fact that
Mm.
we have a Mass which is a universal Mass, and that's what we've got to get on board with, while also allowing more diverse expressions of that liturgical style.
Mm.
And I think that he will have he's a tremendously precise and nuanced figure. And where
Mm.
Pope Francis scared people by some of the things he said, people going, what does he mean by that? Is he, is he against Catholic teaching? Does he want to, and
Yes.
therefore Pope Francis couldn't sell that. I
Mm.
think that Pope Leo will be able to handle that with more precision. He's a tremendous. He talks an awful lot about mystery, mystery in the sense of. So
Mm.
he talks an awful lot, and about obviously a personal experience with Jesus Christ, which is an encounter that we have, and it's an encounter with mystery whereby it's a relationship that transforms us. And we also have this, and this is what liturgy is for. It's this opportunity to engage a mystery. And Augustine, his great mentor, tells us that mysterion is like, in one place he compares it to a fire. That it's not something you understand or you document. It's something that you stand close to, and you're shaped by it. It warms you, it changes you. And so too with mystery, it's not something you master or you dominate. It's something that shapes and transforms you over time. And so Augustine was talking about the Trinity. He was saying that, we give ourselves to the Trinity, and then over time it starts to shape us, so we start to think and speak in Trinitarian ways. And this is the role of liturgy, I think, for for Pope Leo as a mystery, which builds on and supports the personal encounter or the experience of Jesus Christ, which is at the heart of all genuine discipleship and the heart of all conversion. So he seems to again have just this strange capacity to bridge Francis and Benedict, and to bring the best elements of both.
That's a superpower, isn't it? In a divided world where we like to polarize and judge and
exactly
pick our tribe and our camp and then throw stones. It's like, it's
and
wonderful.
sadly
to have
that'll happen. Happen. It's only a matter of time before he says something that alienates some group of people. But he does seem careful. He's aware of it. He's really plugged into the Pope Francis, again, wonderful, wonderful Pope. But I often wondered if he was quite as careful in what he said, and if he was aware of how this would be heard. One of the interesting things is Pope Leo's brothers, that that one of them is completely loose cannon and seems to be an arch conservative, arch Trump supporter, and the other guy seems to be a fairly liberal, progressive guy. So it's quite possible that from an early stage, Pope Leo was able to keep both of these guys in the conversation and to speak with a sort of a clarity, from home. And he seems to have been able to do that, all his life. Like someone mentioned that one of the big problems in Peru and in Latin America in general is that you've got two camps. You've got the liberation theology, which is influenced by Marxism and is very socially progressive and might be light on the supernatural dimensions. And then you've got Opus Dei, who are also very, very powerful, which would be fundamentally opposed to liberation theology. And so Prevost, now Pope Leo, was able to be liked and supported by both of those sides, which is just an incredible gift, And so, if he can negotiate the liberation theologian bishops and Opus Dei bishops, then he can do a decent job, I think, in the church, But he seems to have that care, that precision, that I'm aware of how this is going to sound, and I'm going to say this, and his signaling is really, really good.
It's a great gift to have because the scrutiny with which leaders in general, whether you're a politician or a pope, boy, it's hard not to mess up. I remember being, I got to go to Rome a couple of years ago, and it was my first time there. And got to see a general audience on Wednesday, and the Pope was there, and it was so funny because, of course, a couple of years ago, his health still wasn't good.
Yeah,
and I just really appreciate his fortitude and his grit to continue to be with people, and it was so neat because, he'd be reading the document that he's been given, and it just sounded like he wanted to be anywhere but there, and so just blah 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 blah. And then he'd look up and he'd go off script. And he lit up like a Christmas tree. He just seemed so happy and so invigorated. And then he'd kind of catch himself and be like, blah, 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 blah. And it was so fun to watch. I thought, I wish I knew Italian because whatever you're saying, it's
Yeah.
coming from the heart when you go off script. And
Yes.
I could see the faith. Like his eyes just illuminated faith and joy and
Yeah.
passion and conviction. And then he'd go back to his script, which,
Yeah.
it's fine. But it was
Yeah.
fun to see that side of him. But I think that's maybe the side too that got him in trouble.
Yeah. Like I think that y- you know, there was an interview with then Cardinal Prevost, which was around the time that he was involved in removing Bishop Strickland
Mm,
and other bishops who opposed Pope Francis, and he was asked about obedience, and that was his thing. He was, that
mm,
ultimately Bishop Strickland, for him, it wasn't about what he was saying, but you vow of obedience and you're breaking it. You're done. You can't. You can't do that. And he made the point that God seems to give us the popes that we need at particular times.
mm,
And it's really interesting to me, when you think about all these people coming into the church, in Europe and in really secular places that are converting to the church at the Easter Vigil in France and the UK,
mm,
and we see it here in Canada. And many of these young people, in particular, may not be identical to Francis, but they may not even have considered Catholicism were it not for the Francis effect, were it not for the fact that Francis, within the wider world, elevated the Catholic brand. Because when Francis was elected, when people heard the word Catholic, they thought immediately about scandal and clerical
mm.
sexual abuse and things of that nature. Now the brand means something completely different. And so it brought the church onto the radar of people who, once they started journeying, then were able to come into the church,
Right.
and so I think Francis has been amazing for that, because the wider secular world absolutely adored him because of what he said. But what he
Mm,
said was also liable at times to cause disease within the church. And so, so many priests seem to feel attacked by Francis all the time, that he's always calling them out over this or that, and the poor curia, every now and again he goes and he just lays into them over this, that, and the other. Maybe it will be the case that Pope Leo will be more attentive to inside the church, but then the problem
right.
with that is that there will be times when the media will say, "You will not believe what he said. He actually believes
Right.
Catholic stuff,"
He
um,
actually believes Catholic stuff.
and so we might be in for a papacy like that, where people within the
Mm,
church are going, "Okay, I know where you're coming from." People outside of the church are maybe thinking that he's rolling back, but he's not going to roll back anything. He's not going to
mm.
he's not going to reject anything that Francis did. Simply that the tone will be precise and different, and so
Yes.
we saw that when he was asked a question in relation to women priests, and straight away his answer was very, very theological, which would have made a huge amount of sense to people within the church, but it
Mm,
wasn't giving the media what they wanted. He was
gotcha.
saying, well, what you're suggesting is the clericalization of women, and the problem is that we've already got too much clericalism, and so we need to be able to imagine leadership roles for people outside of the clergy. And
Mm.
but these people, which is a really great theological answer,
Yes.
but the secular media is going, yes or no, damn it, yes or no, and he wasn't giving it to them, but the people who are within could go, that's actually really interesting. So we've got to reimagine leadership in the church beyond the office of the priest,
Mm,
and he's 100% committed to Francis's synodal path, which he
right.
seems to understand as greater representation, greater voices, more collegiality,
Mm,
greater lay participation,
mm.
greater lay roles. Now, of course, I'm sure he wouldn't imagine it to be a non-discriminate lay voice. Like, the lay voice
Right.
would have to be a coherently Catholic voice,
Right.
um, but he's committed to that. He just seems to be a continuation of Francis with
Yeah.
precision, bringing in some of the insights that we have in Pope Benedict and John Paul II, with a heart for evangelism and mission, with real intelligence and care.
Mm.
And we're saying all this 7 days on when it's just hope.
We're gonna have this talk again in two
I
years from now.
know.
Going, oh, I can't believe
Yeah,
it.
exactly. Yeah.
How did we get here? And
Exactly.
yeah.
This is teenage intoxication right now, rather than the 50 years of marriage.
Yeah. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things you said, and it's off topic in one sense, but you did mention it, and I am curious by it, and I'm glad you mentioned. But you just talked about how young people are really coming to like they're coming to the church, and they really are, and we're seeing it. They're talking. I was just at the Global Leadership Summit that I was talking to you about, or the Global Leadership Summit in the UK, and they talked about that, and it's stats to back it up and everything. But you said something that I find fascinating. You said they're really drawn to mystery. This young generation. Tell me a little bit of what you're seeing or what your thoughts are on that, because I just think that's neat,
Yeah.
beautiful.
So one of the difficulties that we have is that we've got very small sample sizes for
Right.
research into who they are and what they think.
Mm.
But the small sample size that we have seem to indicate that they're all turning their back on the secularism which they've experienced as banal and meaningless and hopeless. That more and more they're seeing that a world without God cannot compete with the enchantment of a world with God. And so they're yearning for something which is eternal, something which is more significant. And so they seem to be looking for radical alternatives. And we're seeing that not simply, there's actually one similar time frame, which is in the first part of the first half of the 20th century, where countless young people were they had given up essentially on secular liberal democracy. They'd said, look, this leads to economic crisis, Great Depression, World War
Mm.
One, fascism, communism, World War Two, and they were giving up on that, and they were turning to something more radical. And so you had a huge influx of people into religious life, into holy orders, and you also
Mm.
had a huge influx of young people into truly radical politics, fascism, communism, etc.
Right.
And we're starting to see something similar. And so it's not just a massive movement of young people into the church. There's also young people becoming more militant and radicalized in terms of. So
Mm.
there's Marxist groups that I'm familiar with, and they're reporting record intakes of of numbers as well.
Wow.
And so the turn away from the tiredness, the banality, the averageness, and the hopelessness of what they see all around them is making them yearn for something more. And many of them are yearning for something more in terms of the enchantment that comes through relationship with Jesus Christ. And they love the difference. They love
Mm.
that for a long period of time it seemed to be that mission involved becoming as much like the secular world as possible.
Right.
Um, Now it seems to be that younger people in particular are looking for an alternative to it.
Right.
And therefore Catholicism and orthodoxy are
Yes.
the primary beneficiaries of this, the ones that look least like the secular world. Liberal Protestantism is, declining apace. Those denominations that don't differentiate themselves significantly from the liberal secular social order are declining apace. And then the odd ones, the weird ones, like Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, are seeing these numbers. Now, again, whether this is a lasting thing, whether please God it will be, whether this is the fruits of something beautiful and a tremendous reinvigoration of the church, that's quite possible, but it's early days. But it's interesting. I think that that's something that we have to respond to and build on, in terms of how we do evangelism, while also being aware that it's one of the difficult things that I think we need to be multilingual in our evangelistic capacities, because someone said that yes, there's massive numbers coming into the church, but there's also massive numbers going out the back door, and the posture and the message that brings people in, and in the message that keeps the older people in, there may be two distinct messages. There may be two distinct styles. So an example of this would be last summer, a young person came from Alberta to summer school, and they were saying, it's Sunday, where will I go? And I recommended a parish recommended Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the week after I was talking and said, how'd you get on, Our Lady of Guadalupe? And he said, yeah, it was really good, it was a fantastic preacher, the sermon was really brilliant, but I just didn't like the she said that she had a dream later on that night where there were zombies coming after her, right? And this sounds rude, and it was rude, but she was saying that she thinks the dream was occasioned by the fact that when she came into the church, there were all these older people, greeters, going to try and touch her and grab her and bring her in, and for her, the welcome, which I love and which I need, and which makes me feel at home, was for her the kind of welcome she gets when she goes into a phone store or a Best Buy or a bank and someone's going up to try and grab her and sell her stuff.
Right.
So straight away she felt she was part of the same sales culture that occupies her entire life, where everybody wants to sell her something.
Right.
And so, and so it was really weird. And so the very thing which enthuses me and which is necessary for me and people of my generation, may be a little bit off-putting to the, to like the people raised online on COVID and things like that, that maybe there's a different kind of thing. I don't know, but I think, but I think we need to be increasingly, we need to be increasingly multilingual in what we say and how we do things. I love the way at St. Benedict you've got the Sunday morning mass and then Sunday at 4, which is a different vibe.
Right.
And I think in many ways that might increasingly become more of the norm, that you might see different vibes. You might see different styles of liturgy, which can appeal to the different kinds of people, and I think that might be necessary, because again there seems to be a reduction of interest. They hate the idea that they're being lied to or something isn't authentic. And so this person is coming up and they're saying they love me. They don't love me, or no more than the person in the phone store, the person in the bank, or the, or the wait staff. And they just want my money, or in this case, they just want me to bring down the demographic numbers.
Right.
Now, again, this could be a small a small section, but these are things that I think we have to be more and more aware of, and I've got to try
What's
and
the absence of trust, isn't it? Because
exactly,
I'm going to imagine your motives because I
yeah,
don't know you and I don't
yeah,
trust you. And
exactly,
some people are naturally trusting, some people, or maybe there's probably a pendulum.
yeah,
And so, but in the absence of a relationship, I have
yeah,
to come to a conclusion, and that conclusion is not based on trust.
yeah,
And that's that's one of the things we have to contend with. Father James, it was his wisdom to keep both the two different styles and
yeah,
recognize the beauty in both. And he was multilingual right from the beginning. And
yeah,
I remember drawing I wish I could find it. I do things in the spur of the moment, and it looks really good, and then of course it gets lost, and I try to recapture it and don't quite have the same. But I drew a graph or a map one time of coming into the church, having no faith, and then maybe doing Alpha, a tool for
yeah,
evangelization, and then from there developing friendships and approaching church and sacraments,
yeah,
and then coming back on team, and then maybe serving in other ministries, getting involved in a connect group, starting to read books, going on retreats. Like a lot
yeah,
of things start to unfold in people's lives when they get super hungry. um, and it's not uncommon for them to sometimes be on the verge of spiritual burnout. Like they get
yeah,
over involved, they get too enthusiastic, and they they uh they sometimes don't put as much attention into some of the other parts of their life that need their attention. And that's part of the maturity process, I find, when you're going from no church or no faith to faith. You kind of, there's that teenage intoxication, as you talked
yeah,
about, and it's normal, it's beautiful, and it's healthy. And then they kind of get to a crossroads where, okay, I can't keep this pace up. What am I going to
yeah,
do? And hopefully they have some great people in their life giving them advice. And that's, I find, a pivotal point, that they either, one of three things, they either ditch and we don't see them
mhm,
anymore, they get weird and
right,
get super religious and now
yeah,
aren't really useful to
yeah,
anybody,
yeah,
other than internally in these small devotion groups
yeah,
that box themselves in and judge, or somehow they have the grace of becoming multilingual
yeah.
and recognizing they have needs in this season, but they're still relevant to people they used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's exactly right. And you mentioned Father James there. Many of the things that he was doing and does in relation to people discerning their particular skills, their particular
Mhm.
talents, who they are, whether that's as a, as a prophet, as a teacher, as a shepherd, and so on and so forth. I think that's and things of that nature are really, really important. In order to enable people to find their way
Mhm.
in the ecosystem of the church and have something that's life giving to them where they can serve.
Yes.
I think it's a it's a really good thing, and maybe and maybe I think the ways in which we do shepherding, teaching, prophesying, etc.,
Yeah.
in 2025, maybe we might be constantly tweaking it. To
Yes.
like to incorporating certain things, but ultimately, I think that the fire, the encounter, um, whatever and wherever that is for you, you've got to
Yes.
constantly be able to go to that well. And if that well goes, then you're toast. But as long as the well is there, I think you can, because all through our lives in the church, there's times when we'll fail and when others will fail, and we'll get peed off with this and we'll get peed off with that and we'll get bored with this. But there has to be that thing. And whether that thing is the is the experience that people have, whether it's in Alpha, whether it's in for Augustine in the garden in Milan or wherever, whether that's a spirituality that emerges in relation to the Eucharist, Eucharistic adoration, whether it's something that happens in prayer, whether that's something that happens in groups with with mentors and peers and allies. But we have to, I think, have that, that fire, that place where we can connect with Christ, connect with the Holy Spirit, that will fuel the rest of the stuff and help us to endure when things don't go well. Because any, like humans are humans, and
Right.
and so that's one of the things that I fear for, I don't fear, but I'm aware that I see some people coming into the church, and God bless them, I love them, and they're doing things that I never saw before. Like so many times I'm going to communion, and I'm walking up, and then there's a kid, and this kid could be 30, but to me they're a kid, and they're dropping to their knees, and they're and things like this, and I'm going, whoa, and that's fantastic, and that's great, but that intoxication, that when they're put on a committee to help raise funds for the building of the roof, and it's not all this intense moment, how will they cope? And they need to be able to cope. And so maybe it's the Eucharist that fuels them in this, but to know that for these people coming in, that Luther, probably not the best person to quote, but Martin Luther, he said, "Simul justus et peccator," once justified and a sinner. Like, we never stop being sinners. Like the bad stuff never completely goes away. It's not all the beatific vision all the time. It will be in heaven, but now it isn't. And so we do need structures and pathways for these people to get fed, and to find those trajectories. But it's exciting. Like, it's the church, and I'm often telling students this. The church is in such a better place now than it was in the 1990s when I was an undergrad. That the churches back then were pretty full, but they're much healthier now. Some of the so that recent study, you spoke about it in England by the Bible Society, where the amount of people who were self-identifying on a census as Catholic, that's gone down, but mass attendance has gone up. And so what that means is that people who were baptized Catholic when they're 50 and they haven't been to mass since they were 12, they're no longer saying, "I'm Catholic."
Right.
In one sense, that's
never had
no
them
big
anyway.
deal. They never had them anyway.
Right.
The only meaningful stat is attendance at mass.
Amen.
And so all these things, for every one that comes in, 8 go out. Yes, there's 8 people no longer identifying as Catholic, because their 100% secular lives, they would have nominally thought of themselves as Catholic. I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school or whatever, so I'm a Catholic. Now they'd say I'm nothing. And that's fine. And so it's those numbers aren't that meaningful, but the general social, like, if I see a young person today, if they're 25, I think they're going to be so much more open to the faith than if they were even 35.
Right.
I think there has been a shift, and it's an incredible and a beautiful thing. Again, down to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
But also, things like, you're on the board of Divine Renovation and things like that. These movements which emerged and which have sought to address the problem, dare I say it, some of them are working. Dare I say it, it's actually, it's like there are fruits, and that's really great to see.
Thanks be to God. Thanks be. It's fun to watch my son Christian. He's run Alpha twice now. I'm out at Holy Apostles Parish here, just outside the city. But he and my daughter and my mom, they all go to St. Benedict Parish. And he ran Alpha for people under 35. And the first time he ran it, there was over 100 people engaged, and then they ran it again, and another 100 people engaged, and something's happening, and he's just finds it unbelievable.
Yeah.
8 people in his age group in their 20s paid their own way to go to London just a couple of weeks ago, and
Wow.
so they're fully committed.
Yeah.
Their lives of transformation, their commitment to one another, their faithfulness to mass and the sacraments, it's like, wow, like
Yeah.
this is fresh, it's new, and trying to wrap our head around it. And he's working so closely with Father Simon and the team at St. Benedict, and
Yeah.
they're all excited and they're trying to figure it out. And I hadn't seen that in my lifetime. They
Yeah.
don't call us Generation X for nothing. Like,
Yeah. Exactly.
like everything just
Yeah.
disappeared in my generation.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a resurgence. And I think Pope Leo's the hope that we get, the state of
Yeah.
the church, the opportunity from culture and the world around us exploring faith. And as you mentioned, other things like Marxism and maybe other options that give them a sense of identity. I think we I think we have a really exciting opportunity to steward that well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's the like the remarkable responsibility we have, that we have a massive opportunity.
Mm,
And it's also helpful because so many of the bodies that I'm associated with, for decades, they've been going, well, numbers are declining. What can we do? We've got to just fail with respect. Um, like we can't use that excuse anymore.
yeah.
We've got, like, literally, the good news is the truth. It is the greatest story ever told, and it's aided by the Holy Spirit. If we fail, it's on us. you
Right?
you know, it
Why do you
is.
say that? I agree with you, but why do you say that? You say
Say,
the Holy Spirit, if we fail, it's on us. I agree with you, but
yeah,
why do you say that?
absolutely. Like that. Like that. It's a remarkable thing that it's sort of the the Christian view of the world is the truth. It's that the rabid secular view of the world that reduces everything to materiality. People largely don't accept that and never have in human history. The story of Jesus Christ and salvation and the last becoming first and the first becoming last. This is the most compelling and beautiful story in human history. And then, in addition to all of that, the Holy Spirit, who is hope itself, love itself, joy itself, faith itself, fuels our proclamation, and is active in the hearers of that. There is no excuse for for not being able to share this story. If it isn't shared, it's because of our own. It's entirely because of our own failing, our own unwillingness. And I think
Yeah.
for too long, too many Catholics, particularly in places like Ireland, which is probably still, it's probably 20, 30 years behind where we are. But the basic sense was, what can you do? Sort of, it's just a new secular world. People don't believe in this anymore. What can we do? Nothing we can do. And so it's all about managing decline and that
Mm.
and that sense of hopelessness, which was itself a refusal of the Holy Spirit. If the Holy Spirit, theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, if the Holy Spirit is the source of hope itself, to refuse hope, meaningful hope, is to reject the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And so we were doing that for so long, and thankfully these numbers and these experiences, um, they take away that excuse. They take away
Yeah.
that excuse for sloth and spiritual laziness.
Mm.
We can't we can't say that anymore. We have a tremendous opportunity, and also, immigration gives us a tremendous opportunity.
Yes.
You see so many newcomers to Canada, and how can we build on that? Like,
Mm.
it's a really exciting time to be part of the church, for me to be part of theological
Mm.
education, and again, it's if things don't work, it's either our fault or the fault of the Holy Spirit, and it's not the fault of the Holy Spirit.
I couldn't agree more. I do feel full of hope. I love what we do in terms of helping pastors and bishops learn to lead well in teams, because again, with that attitude, with that disposition, with that perspective of encountering Christ, receiving the Holy Spirit, this empowered with hope and joy, and that with God on our side, he wants us to win. And win what?
Yeah.
Win imaginations, capture people's hearts, introduce them to Christ and the church. And I just think it's so fun. And this is a season of, I think it's a season of winning. And it's exciting.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the only obstacle to that is that, when you talk to far more bishops and help them than me, but oftentimes they have that tired look because they're trying to manage everything.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
I think one of the keys for them is to remember what Jesus Christ calls them to, which is not necessarily to manage everything. It's to have the joy of proclaiming the good news and being conformed to Jesus Christ. As long as they do that, everything else will follow. And so the poor guys get so snowed under with a billion things. That's why the good Lord gave us lay people. Hand off all this nonsense to as many lay people as possible, and get out there, feel the joy, feel the Holy Spirit, and proclaim the good news. We've punished so many bishops and priests and pastors, for too long.
Yeah. And I wonder if part of that, gosh, I could talk to you for another hour. I wonder if part of that isn't the expectations or the identity they take on in those roles. And it seems to be a bit off, and not necessarily their fault, but I think that we and they can be more intentional about what that means, what that looks like, just like you said. But then we're going to have to get this leadership piece, right? We're going to have to get organizational structure and competency, right?
Yeah.
And we can, like, those things are very doable. I find great joy in bringing that. And as lay people working at a diocese or a parish, if we know what we're freeing up our pastor for or our bishop for, we can get behind that. And that's a heck of a mission to lay your life down for, to free up these men to be amazing. Like, well, how about that? Like, how about that? It's just so fun. Yeah, so great. Dr. David Deane, I really enjoy you, brother. I love spending time with you.
Right back at you, Ron.
So much.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the chat. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for all the wonderful work you do. It's really important, and it's making a difference. And so God bless you.
Thank you, my friend. I really appreciate that. I want to get you back, so I want to talk about your book, and I want to share that with as many people as possible. In the meantime, you enjoy this great Nova Scotia sunny weather. And for all of you that have been listening in, thank you for what you do in the church. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for your openness to the Spirit and working alongside of your pastors and your bishops to really make our parishes places of encounter and growth. So God bless you all, and we'll see you next time. I want to encourage you, as you lead this week, be faithful to God and generous to others. See you next time, and remember, if you're still breathing, you are powered for impact.